What's up everyone? Welcome to SoAndSoFilms. My name is Andrew and today we're going to be doing a review over the Sony A7 II. Alright, so before I get into this review, I want to go ahead and give a shout out to our good friends over at Project Evolution Automotive for helping us get the Sony A7 II and some of our new camera equipment. So this right here is the kit that Project Evolutions had sent to us. It is the camera with the 28 to 70 millimeter f3.5 to 5.6 kit lens. And they also had a Neewer extended battery grip sent as well, which you definitely will need with this camera. So let's go ahead and get started with the review. I find this camera really lightweight and compact and really easy to use with my gimbal such as the DJI Ronin-M. And it makes it really easy to do run and gun situations where I don't have to have the camera on a gimbal or a handle. Now getting on the inside of this camera, I can go ahead and point out that it has a 24.3 megapixel full frame sensor. Whoa. Shooting handheld with this camera has actually been phenomenal. It's the first to have the 5-axis stabilization system, which is going to stabilize the image even if you're using an older film lens like I typically use my Minolta MD. When using the kit lens or any lens that offers autofocus for this camera, you're going to be using 25 contrast points and 117 phase detection points, which is actually 30% faster than the Sony A7. Now going on a little walk around with the camera, I'll go ahead and start with the back. The camera with the extended battery does offer you a bunch of buttons to mess with. Starting from the top left on the camera, you're going to have your menu button, which I think is pretty conveniently placed if you're using the camera with two hands. It's pretty easy to get to that button with your left thumb. Then if you go across the camera, you do have one of your customizable buttons. This is the third customizable button, and the other two are located on the top. Also on the top of the camera, you're gonna have a bunch of dials. So here's gonna be your mode dial, which has, every mode on the face of the planet. And then you're gonna have your exposure compensation dial, which I do tend to use a lot when filming in program mode. On the back of the camera, you're gonna find two separate dials. You'll have the one dial up here, located next to where you will rest your thumb, and I use that to control my aperture. The second dial is right here next to your select button. I have mine customized to control my ISO. Amongst other buttons on the back of the camera, you have your autofocus manual focus switch right here. And then I actually use this so that I can get focus peaking when shooting video. Above this dial, you'll find your function button, which I think is also conveniently placed. With your thumb being right here, it's easy to maneuver and get around and be able to use all these buttons while having the camera up to your face. But the one thing that I do not think is convenient, other than that stupid button, it's going to be their tilty, flippy, uppy screen, which also in the Sony A5000 review that I did a few years back, I complained about this as well. I think that the only time that this is actually useful is if you're filming below you and you want to flip the screen up. But there's also another problem with that, and that's if you flip it too far up, the viewfinder thinks that your face is in front of the camera and it turns the screen off. So you have to pull this down, let the screen come back on, and then flip it back up to use it again. So please, Sony, on the next camera, have it flip out to the side or something. Just don't do that. So going around to the left side of the camera, you're going to have two flaps you're going to have to try to pry off to get to your ports. The first port that you will have is actually a 3.5 millimeter microphone jack, and you will also have a 3.5 millimeter headphone jack. Behind that, you will have a micro USB and a micro HDMI slot. On the right side of the camera, you'll get an SD card slot, which thankfully it is not inside of the battery compartment. Now on the front of the camera, you're going to get that super nice white and crispy Sony logo and the nice 8 for Alpha and then the 7 Mark II logo. Just cool aesthetics. But going off the aesthetic and the build of this camera's build quality is actually phenomenal. It's going to be using a magnesium alloy body on the inside, which, sounds like a fancy term, but to be honest, this thing just feels like a brick. I mean, it's super tough. I'm not worried about dropping it, even though I do not suggest dropping your camera, but I do have like a sense of security knowing that if it did fall out of my lap or it fell off a tripod, I think that it would end up okay. When I was actually researching into getting this camera, I did read that the Sony A7 had a weird issue with its grip, that it just wasn't large enough and that your hand would have a lot of like free space right here. But with the Sony A7 II, they definitely gave it a larger grip, which allowed you to have a better area to put your finger when taking stills, and it does push out the front dial right here, so it's easier to get to this, more comfortable when shooting freehand mode. Now for the front of the camera, I do love the grip. I do love where the dial and where your shutter button is. But the one thing that really irritates me when I'm trying to use this, and this is especially when I'm out on a shoot and I'm trying to change lenses, the button being right here in between where your lens should be and the grip does make it pretty difficult to get your finger down in there to be able to twist your lens off. Other than these small issues of the record button location, the tilty uppy screen, and the awkward location of the lens release button, I think this camera is built very well, and I would suggest it to others who want a really solid camera. So last in this review, I'm going to go ahead and give you my own thoughts on the picture quality of the camera. In these photos and videos, I have been using the kit lens, and then I've also been using my Minolta MD 50mm f2. Which, by the way, if you do want a really cheap lens to start off with this camera, I heavily suggest this guy. So first, I'm gonna go ahead and talk about the photo quality of the camera. So in this first photo, you can see a woman who was walking down the sidewalk that I passed while going to one of my classes. And this was shot with the Minolta 50mm, most likely at an aperture somewhere around 4. Now, in looking at some of the low light photos that I've done with this, I've done some portrait work with my roommate, and I think with a prime lens like the 50mm or like a 35 or 28mm, I believe you can get some super sharp images off this sensor. So in this black and white image right here, you can see my roommate smoking a cig in front of some neon sign. And while he is super in focus, the sign behind him is still really sharp, even though it's slightly out of focus. You can also notice that there's not a whole lot of noise in the shadows of this image. The camera does a phenomenal job of reducing noise, and there's actually some options within the settings that does allow you to have high ISO noise reduction. Now, when talking about the video capabilities and quality of this camera, the one thing that I really do wish that it had was 4K video, which unfortunately is not available on this camera, but once you get up to cameras like the A7R II, it'll definitely come with 4K video and also things like the 5-axis image stabilization system. Now, primarily when shooting video on this camera, I'm going to use the kit lens and the Minolta 50mm, and then also sometimes I will use the Canon 10 to 18mm, which I am currently using on my SL1 to shoot this video. I'm currently using the Fotodiox EF to E adapter, and to be honest, some lenses are just not going to be compatible with it, and you will have some autofocusing issues during video and when shooting stills. Now, going off of using the Fotodiox EF to E adapter, I'm actually using it in this video right here, which was shot on the DJI Ronin-M, and I was using the S-Log2 picture profile. Shooting with picture profiles like S-Log1 and S-Log2 gives me the ability to go back in my video editor like Premiere Pro or After Effects and get down to the fine details of color correcting. Also, one of the really nice things that you can do with this camera is that you have the ability to shoot at 1080p 60 frames at 50 megabytes a second. Now, believe me when I say this, these video files are massive, but when you put them in the editor, you have so much data to work with when color correcting or doing any other kind of effects. So this covers my review on the Sony A7 Mark II. If you guys have any questions, please let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to thumbs up and subscribe.